Good morning, guys. Happy Thursday. Today we're going to review factoring out the greatest common factor, or the GCF. So, greatest common factor. And the first thing we're going to do is find out what prime factors are in each number. So to do that, we're going to draw our factor trees. I should do that in a separate color. Alright, so let's start with 26. Well, what number is going to 26? Well, 13 goes into 26, and 13 times 2 is 26. I always start with 2 in whatever number. And 13 is actually a prime number itself, just 1 and 13. There are no other numbers that divide nicely into 13. So once we've done this, we're going to start circling all of the factors that they have in common. So I'm not going to cross that dividing line there, and let's circle all the things they have in common. Well, they each have a 13. So I'm going to look at all the numbers that I circled in just one of these, and you can pick either one, it doesn't matter. And I've only circled one, so my greatest common factor is 13. And something I want you guys to always be on the lookout for is see if the smaller number goes in nicely to the larger number. So take 26 divided by 13 and see if you get a nice round number, no decimals. And if you do, then that's going to be your GCF. So now let's do the greatest common factor of 8 and 14. So 8, I know, is 2 times 4. And I can break down 4 even further into 2 times 2. 14 I know is 2 times 7. So let's circle what they have in common. So I'll circle a 2. And it doesn't look like they share anything else in common. So my greatest common factor is going to be 2. And we haven't had to do step 3 yet, but we will in a minute. So steps 3 and 4 are coming up here soon. So 9 and 21 and 25 and 80. So I'll leave those two for you guys to try if you'd like to. So you can pause the video here and give these a shot. And let's see. 21 I know is, well, 2 doesn't go into 21, but 3 does. So 3 times 7 is 21. And 9 I know is 3 times 3. So let's divide, or not, we found our factor tree, our prime factors. So I'm going to divide this into our 2 parts. You know what, while I'm at it, I'll divide the other one into our 2 parts, kind of separate those. So I'm going to separate everything. And now, let's circle what do they have in common. I've got a 3 in common, and a 7 and a 3 are not the same, so I've only got one factor here. So my greatest common factor is just 3, and I haven't had to multiply yet. Let's see if I have to in number 4. So 25 I know is 5 times 5, and 80 is, let's see, 2 times 40, and 40 is 2 times 20, 20 is 2 times 10, and 10 is 2 times 5. So these are all my prime factors. Got my little boot drawn there around all my prime factors. And let's see, what do they have in common? I've got a 5 and a 5. I've got only 2's on the right, and I just have a 5 on the left, so nothing else in common. Alright, so my greatest common factor is just going to be, what did I circle here? Just 5. Okay, so we haven't had to do any multiplication yet, but I'm sure we will in a minute. So let's look at our factoring out binomials. Now number 5. Again, we want to factor out the greatest common factor, so we're going to find that GCF first. So first things first, we're going to find the greatest common factor of our two coefficients, these two numbers out front here. And I've got a 2 in common and nothing else. So my greatest common factor of coefficients is going to be just 2. But now I've got to figure out what's the GCF, or the greatest common factor, of my variables. So I've got x and x cubed. And if I have 1x over here and 3x's over here, well, they only have 1 in common. And again, that trick you can use, just take the smaller exponent. That's always going to work. So this would just be x, or x to the first. So my final answer, my final GCF, is going to be 2x. So let's do my very last step. So my actual greatest common factor is 2x, like we just found. But now I want to divide out that greatest common factor. So I'm going to take 4x cubed, divide that by 2x, and a positive 10x, and divide that by 2x. And our final answer, we're always going to have 2x out front. Whatever we're dividing out, it's going to go out front. And we're going to have what's left over in the parentheses. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. X cubed divided by x to the first. Remember, we can just subtract these exponents. So 3 minus 1 is 2. And I have a positive 10 divided by positive 2, which is a positive 5. And these x's are going to cancel. So this is going to be my final answer, right here. Alright, let's try number 6. So the GCF of 7 and 28. 7 is just 1 and 7. 28, I have 2 and 14. 14 is 2 times 7. Let's circle what they have in common. Got a 7 and a 7, and nothing else. So my greatest common factor is 7. And there's that same trick again. You could see if your smaller number goes into your bigger number. And if it does, that's your GCF of the coefficients. And here I have 5 x's, and here I have no x's. So what's the smaller of those two? No x's or 5 x's? Well, the smaller number is no x's. So since they don't have any x's in common, because this one doesn't have any x's, then my GCF won't have any x's either. Okay, Now let's take our next step. We're going to divide everything by our GCF. Excuse me. So 7x to the fifth minus 28. We're going to divide everything out. Divide everything by that GCF. Make sure you really focus on this negative sign. Don't drop that. So we're going to keep our 7 out front because we divided that out of everything. 7. And now these 7's cancel. So what am I left with? Just x to the fifth. And this is a negative 28 divided by positive 7. So a negative divided by a positive is a negative. And 28 over 7 is 4. So this is my final answer. Alright, why don't you guys try those last two? You can pause the video and then we will talk through them here in a second. So 6y cubed minus 15y. First thing we should do, just to save ourselves some time, see if 6 goes into 15. So 15 divided by 6 does not give me a nice number. That's 2.5, so that's not going to work. So we can forget that shortcut. Alright, now let's factor out 6 and 15. So 6 is 2 times 3. 15 is 5 times 3. So what do they have in common? Well, they've got a 3 in common. So GCF there is going to be 3. It's going to start with a 3. And how many y's do they have in common? What's the smaller number of y's that I have here? Well, I've got 3 y's and 1 y. So I'm going to take the smaller of the two and just get 1 y. And the reason there, again, is if I had 3 y's and 1 y, and I wanted to circle what they had in common, well, I can only circle 1 y. So now, let's divide everything by 3y. Sorry about that. So 6y cubed over 3y minus 15y over 3y. I'm going to put that GCF out front. And what's left after I divide it? Well, 6 divided by 3 is 2. Positive 6 divided by positive 3. And y cubed divided by y to the first. 3 minus 1 is 2. And now we've got negative 15. Don't forget that negative sign is there. So negative 15 divided by positive 3. Negative divided by a positive is a negative 5. And these y's cancel. So I'm just left with this for my final answer. And last but not least, let's see if number 8, we can use our shortcut. So 25 over 10 gets me 2.5, so that's not a nice round number. Can't use my shortcut. So now we have to factor both of these. So this is 5 times 2, and this is 5 times 5. So we'll circle what they have in common. They've got a 5, and it looks like nothing else. So my GCF is going to be a 5. Start with a 5. And now we'll look for the variables. I have y to the first and y to the second. So the smaller of those two is just y to the first. And now we can divide out. So 10y plus 25y squared. If I divide these both by 5y, then I get 5y outside and 2 plus 5y. So I hope you guys have a fantastic day. As always, feel free to email me with any questions you have. Your quizzes have been looking really good so far this week. So let's try to keep that up. Nice job.